Welcome to Sweet Dreams Storytelling, where we unwind, relax, and drift into dreamland. I'm your host, Mike, and I'm so glad you're joining me tonight. Let's get cozy and settle in. Story for this evening is our adaptation of a beautiful novel by R.M. Ballantyne, The Golden Dream. Chapter 1, A Harsh Goodbye. The rain drummed steadily on the grey slate roof of Elmwood House, as 16-year-old Ned Sinton stood in the front hallway, a battered canvas satchel clutched in his hand, and a storm gathering not only outside, but within him. "Yusep brought shame on this household," said Uncle Reuben, his voice clipped like shears on hedges. "Pack your things. Yusep, not sleep under this roof another night." Ned opened his mouth to protest again, but the look on his uncle's face was stone. There would be no convincing the man, no appeal to kindness, nor logic, nor memory. Not even Aunt Judith's soft sobs from the drawing room could sway Reuben Sinton once he'd made up his mind. "I didn't steal the silver," Ned said, quieter this time, though the words still tasted bitter on his tongue. "I swear it. And I suppose the silver walked off on its own legs, did it?" Reuben snapped. "You were the last one seen in the dining room. That sip's proof enough." It wasn't proof, not by a long shot, but in the eyes of Uncle Reuben, the truth mattered less than order. Ned, an orphan and the youngest relation in a wealthy household, had never quite belonged. He was a tolerated presence, not a welcomed one. After his parents' death in a carriage accident 3 years ago, Elmwood had become his home in name only. Now, even that thin veneer had cracked. Ned stared at the old man, jaw clenched. He wanted to shout, to demand justice, to make them all see, but pride, or perhaps stubbornness, held him still. If they didn't believe him now, nothing he said would change their minds. "Where will I go?" he asked at last. Reuben turned away and walked back to the warmth of his study without answering. The door closed with a final muffled click. A moment later, Martha, the kind-hearted kitchen maid, hurried down the hallway, her cheeks flushed and her apron damp with soap suds. "Here, Master Ned," she whispered, thrusting a paper-wrapped bundle into his hands. "It's sup's bread, cheese, and some of Cooksepp's ham. Don't argue." Ned blinked, a lump forming in his throat. "Thank you, Martha," he said quietly, gripping her hand for just a second. She sniffled and turned away before he could see her cry. He stepped out into the rain. The wind cut through his coat like a blade. Elmwood stood behind him, tall and stern in the stormlight, every window dark and watching. He didn't look back. What was there for him now? A false accusation, a locked door, and silence. As Ned walked down the long gravel drive and out the iron gates, he thought of his parents. His father's hearty laugh, his mother's lullabies at the piano. What would they think of him now? Alone, unwanted, and carrying a stranger's crime on his shoulders. But as he passed the village green, his steps grew firmer. He would not let this be the end of his story. The world was wide, and though he had only a few coins, a loaf of bread, and the clothes on his back, he had one thing no one could take from him, the knowledge that he was innocent. At the crossroads beyond the town, Ned paused. A signpost stood there, dripping in the rain. One arrow pointed east, toward London, the other pointed west, toward Bristol and the sea. Ned stared at the western road. He thought of ships, faraway lands, and stories of the goldfields in California that he'd overheard in the tavern when Reuben sent him to fetch his pipe tobacco. Gold, a fool-earth's dream, some said. But maybe it wasn't about gold. Maybe it was about something more: freedom, a chance to prove himself, to write his own future, no longer as a dependent in someone else's house, but as a man in his own right. The rain lightened. Ned adjusted his pack, squared his shoulders, and turned west. Chapter 2, Across the Atlantic. The dockyards at Bristol were alive with the sounds of iron on wood, gulls screeching overhead, and sailors barking orders in a dozen accents. The air was thick with the scent of salt water, coal smoke, and rotting fish. For Ned Sinton, it was the scent of freedom and the unknown. He had walked for days from his old home, sleeping under hedgerows, sharing bread with strangers, and earning coins by hauling crates or sweeping tavern floors. In that time, he'd learned more about people than he had in all his years at Elmwood. Most were rough but fair, some were cruel, a rare few were kind. It was one of the kind ones, a one-eyed merchant named Mr. Higgs, who told Ned of a ship sailing for New York within the week, the Southern Queen. A freighter mostly, but it would take paying passengers in steerage. It wasn't luxury, but it would get him across the ocean. The fare was more than Ned had, but Mr. Higgs had smiled with a mouthful of tobacco-stained teeth and said, "You seem the useful sort. Captain Mercer always needs a strong back. Speak to him yourself, lad." So Ned did. Captain Mercer was a grizzled man with a sea-weathered face and piercing eyes. "You want to work your passage?" he asked, sizing Ned up. "You ever sailed before?" "No, sir," Ned said honestly, "but I can learn. I sept not afraid of work." Mercer narrowed his eyes, then turned away. "Report to the bosun at first bell. If you fall overboard, no one seps jumping after you." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. That evening Ned slept curled up between barrels of salted pork on the edge of the docks, heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. 2 mornings later, the Southern Queen cast off her lines and drifted slowly down the channel with a groan of canvas and creak of timber. The land fell away behind her like a fading memory. Ned stood near the stern, one hand on the railing, eyes on the widening sea. He had never felt smaller. Steerage was dark and damp, the smell of unwashed bodies and mildew strong. The hammocks swung like pendulums in the rolling sea, and Ned quickly learned that seasickness was no myth. He lost his first 2 meals over the side, earning jeers from the older sailors. But by the 3rd day he was moving with the roll of the ship. His hands blistered from scrubbing decks, his back ached from hoisting sailcloth, but there was something honest in the pain. It meant he was doing something for himself. Among the passengers was a loud, scrappy boy of about Ned's age, with a freckled face and a grin like he knew a secret the rest of the world didn't. His name was Tommy Rigg. "You look like you swallowed a mop handle," Tommy joked when Ned first helped him carry a water bucket. "I feel like one," Ned muttered, wiping his forehead. "First trip?" "Yes. Same here. I ran off from a bakery job in Liverpool. Got tired of flour and fat old bakers throwing bread rolls at my head." Despite their different backgrounds, the 2 boys quickly became inseparable. They worked side by side, swapped stories, and watched each other's backs. When Ned took a spill on the slippery deck one stormy night, it was Tommy who dragged him out of the path of a falling crate. "You cert daft, Sinton," Tommy grinned after, "but you cert dirt not half bad." Life aboard the Southern Queen was no peaceful voyage. They encountered 2 storms before reaching mid-ocean, each worse than the last. The second one snapped the main topsail and hurled waves over the bow like battering rams. Ned clung to the rigging with frozen fingers as lightning cracked open the sky. That night, 2 sailors disappeared, washed away. The others said, "No time to mourn." At sea, death was just another part of the journey. After the storm passed, the skies cleared into brilliant blue, and the mood lifted. The crew relaxed. Tommy found an old fiddle and began playing in the evenings, bringing laughter back to tired faces. Nindy found himself thinking about California again. Gold, rivers filled with shining dust. But more than that, he thought of independence. In England, he was a cast-off. At sea, he was part of something, even if it was hard and often brutal. "Do you think we'll find gold, really?" he asked Tommy one night under the stars. "I don't know," Tommy said, "but I know I set not going back. Wherever we land, it set will be better than what we left behind." Ned nodded. He didn't know what the future held, but he was going to meet it head-on. After 6 long weeks, land appeared like a smudge on the horizon. New York, a city of brick towers, smokestacks, and opportunity. As the ship creaked into the harbor, bells rang from spires and seagulls circled the masts. Ned stood at the bow with Tommy at his side, wind in their faces. Behind them, the sea stretched endlessly. Ahead of them, a continent full of danger, wonder, and perhaps, just perhaps, a golden dream waiting to be found. Chapter 3: The Call of Gold. New York City, 1850. The city struck Ned Sinton like a punch to the senses. Noisy, crowded, filthy, and alive in a way he had never imagined. Smoke poured from chimneys like angry ghosts, carts clattered on cobblestone streets, and shouting voices rose above the din in a dozen languages. Ned and Tommy Rigg stepped off the Southern Queen, with nothing but their satchels and the wild, unshaped hopes of youth. The docks swarmed with longshoremen, beggars, preachers, and hawkers. Pickpockets moved through the crowd like shadows, and more than once, Ned had to slap a hand off his coat buttons. "Where do we go now?" Tommy asked, squinting up at the tall brick buildings that leaned over the streets like watchers. "Somewhere west," Ned said. "To California." Tommy blinked. "You mean it then? You're really going for the gold?" "I didn't step across the ocean to scrub decks forever," Ned replied. "The gold fields are where people start over. We still earn our own place there. Maybe strike it rich." Tommy snorted. "You sound like one of those posters." He wasn't set wrong. Plastered to nearly every lamppost and fenceboard were broadsheets and handbills shouting in bold ink. Gold. Fortunes await in California. Land of opportunity. The tales ran wild in the streets. Men who had left with nothing and returned with saddlebags of gold. Boys who became bosses. Farmers who became kings. Of course, there were other stories too. Of men dying of thirst in deserts. Of bandits and lawlessness. Of entire fortunes gambled away in a single night. But it was the dream that mattered. The golden dream. The boys found temporary shelter in a dingy room above a fishmonger's on the East River. They worked odd jobs, hauling crates, sweeping saloons, delivering parcels. Every coin was saved, every meal rationed. By the end of the second week, they had just enough for 2 spots in a wagon train headed west. It wouldn't take them all the way to California. They'd still have to cross the Sierra Nevada, but it would get them halfway across the continent to St. Louis, Missouri, the great gateway to the frontier. They signed on with a small group of settlers and tradesmen bound for the Great Plains, led by a rough-edged man named Ezekiel Barlow, a veteran trapper with a voice like gravel and a beard like a mountain goat. "You boys ever shot a rifle?" Barlow asked, eyeing them skeptically. "No, sir," Ned admitted. Barlow spat in the dirt. "Then you sit better learn. Ain't sit much use for fine manners or soft hands out west. Out there, you either learn fast or die fast." The week before departure was a blur of preparation. The wagon train assembled in a field outside the city, 10 wagons, 24 oxen, and over 30 people, farmers, prospectors, widows, a preacher and his wife, even a French fiddler named Claude. It was a tiny village on wheels. Ned and Tommy pooled their money to buy supplies, a battered frying pan, flint and tinder, a coil of rope, 2 wool blankets, and a second-hand rifle with a crooked barrel. A blacksmith named Jokin helped them straighten it for free. "You'll need every shot to count," he said. On the night before they left, Ned stood on a rise overlooking the edge of the city. The lights of New York flickered behind him like fading stars. The air was cool and still. He couldn't sleep. "What if we thought wrong?" he said aloud, more to himself than to Tommy, who lay wrapped in a blanket nearby. "What if there's simp's nothing out there?" Tommy sat up and looked at him through the dark. "There's something out there," he said. "Something better than what we left behind. That's 6 enough for me." Ned nodded slowly. He wasn't chasing gold anymore. Not really. He was chasing freedom, purpose, and the promise that somewhere out in the wide expanse of America, he could become something more than a falsely accused orphan. Tomorrow they would begin the journey west, not by ship this time, but across endless plains, roaring rivers, and silent deserts. Whatever lay ahead, Ned knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back. Chapter 4: Westward Bound. The morning they left New York, the sky was painted with streaks of gold and grey, like the world itself couldn't decide whether to smile or frown. Ned Sinton stood beside the wagon assigned to him, and Tommy Rigg, clutching the rifle they'd straightened, a bundle of supplies and a heart brimming with nervous excitement. Ahead of them lay 2,000 miles of wild country, forests, rivers, mountains, and deserts, all between them and the golden promise of California. The wagon train began moving just after sunrise, creaking and rumbling like a waking beast. Hooves clopped, children shouted, and oxen groaned under their yokes. The city's buildings faded behind them, swallowed by dust and distance. "Next stop, fortune and fame," Tommy said, grinning as he walked beside Ned. "More like blisters and bandits," Ned muttered, but he smiled too. The first few days of the journey were strangely peaceful. The land beyond New York unfurled in rolling green hills and quiet woodlands. Birds sang, the sky stretched forever. But it was hard work. Each day began before dawn. Ned learned quickly how to secure a wagon wheel, how to ration water, how to clean a rifle without jamming it. He blistered his hands repairing harnesses and tore his coat in a bramble patch. Nights were spent huddled around a small fire, aching but satisfied. Tommy took to the road with reckless joy. He joked with the teamsters, played dice with the cook's assistant, and made friends with a stoic German blacksmith named Karl, who promised to teach them both how to trap rabbits with gut precision. One evening, Tommy stood on a rock and announced, "By the time I reach California, I shall be rich, tanned, and entirely too handsome for my own good." 2 out of 3 might happen, Ned laughed. But rich? Not unless you dig faster than a mole. Beyond Pennsylvania, the trail grew tougher, roads became muddy tracks, hills steepened. Thunderstorms came like giants, tossing rain and wind against the wagons until everyone was soaked to the bone. One wagon lost a wheel in a gorge and had to be left behind. They crossed the Ohio River on a makeshift ferry, and Ned watched the water swirl below, deep and dark. A girl from the wagon ahead, Ellie, the preacher's daughter, slipped near the edge and nearly fell. Ned caught her arm just in time. "Thank you," she gasped, wide-eyed. "Careful," he said, flushing red. "It sits a long way down." As they continued west, the land flattened into the vast, endless plains. Grass rippled in waves. The sky turned enormous, like a second ocean turned upside down. Buffalo tracks marked the dirt in massive circular imprints. Some nights, they saw herds in the distance, black dots moving like clouds. One evening, Barlow called everyone together. "From here on, it sits a different country," he said, pointing toward the western horizon. "No more inns, no towns for weeks. If you haven't got grit, now sits the time to turn back." No one turned back. Trouble began after they crossed into Missouri. The heat thickened, and mosquitoes came in swarms. One morning, they found a wagon wheel broken, and the driver, an older man named Cyrus, suffering from heat stroke. Ned helped carry water to him all day. Then came the snakes, long, silent, and venomous. One slithered into the cook wagon and was nearly served with the stew. Another coiled beneath Ned and Tommy's sleeping blankets. "We need boots that bite back," Tommy muttered, stomping it with a shovel. But it was the stampede that tested them most. Late one afternoon, while camp was being set up near a shallow creek, the ground began to tremble. Ned froze, listening. Then came the thunder, distant but growing. Barlow's voice rang out, "Buffalo, stampede," to the wagons. The earth shook as hundreds, maybe thousands of massive, shaggy beasts galloped from the north. A black wall of muscle and dust. People screamed. Horses reared. A wagon tipped. Ned grabbed Tommy and dove behind a rock. The herd passed in a storm of hooves and fear. When the dust cleared, 2 oxen were dead, and 1 wagon was destroyed. No one spoke for a long time. That night, as the stars came out and the fires crackled low, Ned sat beside the ashes of the ruined wagon. He was exhausted. His muscles ached. His clothes were torn and sweat-stained. But his eyes burned with determination. They had crossed rivers, fought weather, faced death on the hoof, and yet they were still walking, still pushing west. "This isn't set just a road," he said to Tommy. "It sets a test. The land doesn't care who we are. It only gives to those who fight for it." Tommy nodded slowly. "Then we better keep fighting." Ahead of them, the land waited, vast, wild, and full of promise. The dream of California glimmered in their minds like a sunrise just over the next ridge. And they walked on. Chapter 5, First Sight of California. It was nearly 6 months after leaving New York when Ned Sinton finally saw it. Not in a dream, not in a poster or a half-whispered tale, but with his own tired eyes. California. The wagon train had crossed the wide and unforgiving American wilderness, battling dust storms, dwindling supplies, sickness, and the gnawing fear that they might never make it. They'd left behind the last outpost in Nevada 2 weeks ago and entered the treacherous mountain passes of the Sierra Nevada, a jagged wall of stone and snow that seemed to rise from the earth like the spine of some sleeping giant. But now, from a high ridge, the mountains fell away in slow golden folds. Beyond lay valleys brimming with oaks, wild grasses, and winding rivers. The sun spilled across the landscape like molten gold, and for a heartbeat, it didn't seem impossible at all that the streams below ran rich with treasure. Tommy stood beside Ned, breathless. "So that sits," he whispered. "That sits, the land of gold." Ned didn't answer. He was too busy staring. It was everything he'd imagined, and nothing like it. Wild, wide, and waiting. A dream made real. The trail into California was no gentle glide. The Sierra passes were narrow and unforgiving. One wrong step could send a wagon tumbling hundreds of feet into the canyon below. On the fourth day of descent, one of the oxen collapsed, legs shaking, froth at its mouth. They had no choice but to leave it behind and push the wagon by hand. Blisters reopened, water ran low. Tommy twisted his ankle and limped for 3 days, refusing help. But finally, after descending a long ridge of switchbacks, the trees opened up, and a winding dirt trail led them into a scrappy, sun-baked settlement marked by a crooked signpost. "Welcome to Dry Creek Gulch, Pop." The numbers were scratched out and replaced so many times it was impossible to read. The town was barely more than a cluster of tents, timber shacks, and canvas-roofed saloons. But it buzzed with activity. Men with shovels and sluice pans milled about the creek bed below. Others traded supplies or shouted heatedly over claims. Dry Creek Gulch wasn't polished, it wasn't safe, it didn't smell particularly good. But it was real, and it was gold country. Ned and Tommy followed their guide, Ezekiel Barlow, into the heart of the camp. Barlow had done his duty, getting the wagon train safely across the continent, and now he tipped his battered hat to the group and disappeared into a saloon without looking back. "That man deserves a mountain named after him," Tommy muttered, rubbing his shoulder. They found a patch of ground near the river and pitched a crude canvas lean-to. Around them, the camp echoed with life, pickaxes striking stone, water splashing from panning trays, gamblers laughing inside tents lit by flickering oil lamps. From deeper down the valley came the rhythmic pounding of a rocker box, the mining tool that filtered dirt for traces of gold. Ned wandered into a makeshift supply store, a tent propped up by wagon wheels, and stared at the prices. Flour was 10 times what it had been in New York. A single shovel cost nearly his whole savings. The storekeeper, a narrow-eyed man with a pipe, chuckled at his expression. "Welcome to California, son. Out here gold sips the currency, but everything else costs a fortune." The next morning, Ned and Tommy joined a group of new arrivals panning at the edge of the creek. A wiry prospector with a sun-leathered face gave them a quick lesson. Gold sips heavy, sits at the bottom, scoop up some dirt, swirl it in water. You still know when you see it, if you stir lucky. For hours, Ned sifted mud and gravel, back aching, hands numb. The sun burned overhead, and the creek water turned cloudy from all the sifting. By midday, they found their first fleck, a tiny glint in the pan, no larger than a grain of rice. Tommy whooped, "We set rich." The prospector chuckled. "One fleck ain't sit to fortune, boy. It sits just a start." But Ned held it up and stared. It gleamed in the light, brighter than any coin. It wasn't the gold itself that made his heart beat faster. It was the proof that the dream was real, that it could be done. They worked until nightfall, finding 3 more flecks. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was something. As they huddled beneath their canvas that night, sore and exhausted, Ned whispered, "This is it, Tommy, the real beginning." Tommy didn't answer at first, then he said softly, "Let's just make sure it sits, not the beginning of the end." The next day, as Ned walked through the settlement, he passed a man arguing loudly over a gold claim. Within minutes, fists flew, and one of them pulled a knife. No lawman came, just a crowd that gathered, watched, and then dispersed. Ned stared in silence. This place wasn't just dangerous, it was lawless. A land of freedom, yes, but also of chaos. A place where men could rise from nothing or fall just as fast. And yet, as he walked back toward the creek, hands aching, clothes dusty, he felt more alive than he ever had in England. The dream was alive. But so were the risks. Chapter 6: Gold Dust and Dreams. By the end of their first week at Dry Creek Gulch, Ned Sinton and Tommy Rigg had blisters on their hands, dirt in their ears, sunburned faces, and 4 tiny gold flecks to show for it. It wasn't set much, but it was gold. Each morning they rose before dawn and made their way to their modest corner of the creek, where they worked alongside dozens of other hopefuls, miners from Boston, New Orleans, Ireland, Mexico, and even China. Some were ragged, some well-dressed, but all were here for the same reason: to chase a dream, to strike it rich, to change their lives. Gold panning was grueling work. Ned had assumed, like many, that it would be simple: scoop, swirl, profit. He was wrong. It took patience, precision, and strength. A wrong angle meant losing flex in the muddy water. A careless toss could waste hours of work. Backs ached from constant bending. Arms grew heavy from hauling bucket after bucket of silt. But slowly they learned. An older miner named Old Joe Tackett, who spoke with a soft Kentucky drawl and smelled permanently of tobacco and sweat, took a liking to them. He'd lost 3 teeth and 1 finger to the frontier, but still grinned like a fox whenever he found gold. "You boys got grit," he said one morning. "That's worth more than luck most days. But listen, if you really want to strike it, you gotta learn the land. The gold doesn't just sit in the stream. It moves, it hides, it runs where the water runs fast in spring, but settles when the current slows." "Where would you dig if you were starting over?" Ned asked. Joe squinted, pointed a gnarled finger upstream. "That bend there, rocks trap the heavy bits. Might be richer soil." They moved their operation the next morning. By evening, they had 3 more specks. Joe winked. "Told ya, listen to the old bones now and again." That night, the mining camp was alive with celebration. One of the larger crews had found a nugget the size of a walnut, and word spread like wildfire. The saloons filled with miners shouting, singing, and drinking as if they'd all struck gold. Ned and Tommy joined the crowd, but kept their coins in their pockets. They couldn't afford to waste a cent. Inside the canvas-walled saloon, card games unfolded across battered wooden tables. A pair of fiddlers scraped out a tune, and a young woman with a cracked voice sang lyrics too rough for polite company. Tommy leaned close to Ned. "This place feels like a kettle with no lid. Sooner or later, it'll boil over." Ned had nodded. He saw it too. The twitchy eyes, the quick tempers, the way hands lingered near belt knives and pistol grips. Gold had a strange effect on people. It didn't just make them greedy. It twisted them, made them suspicious, boastful, reckless. He also saw another pattern. Those who gambled their gold lost it fast. One miner named Billy Rags, who had found a nugget just days ago, was already dead broke. His claim sold, his boots pawned. He now begged outside the store, asking for beans. "That won't be us," Ned said firmly, as they left the saloon. "No," Tommy replied. "We build something that lasts." A few days later, while digging near the bend Old Joe had suggested, Ned's shovel hit something hard, not rock. He reached into the mud and pulled out a small gold nugget, heavy in his hand, roughly the size of a thimble. He stared at it, stunned. Tommy let out a yell so loud it spooked the nearby mules. They took the nugget to the assayer, a grumpy man in a wide-brimmed hat who barely looked up from his ledger. 7 grams, he muttered. $32. Ned blinked. $32 was more than a month's wages back home. It was food, tools, new boots, a better tent, and still enough left to save. They sold the nugget and bought a proper shovel, 2 pans that didn't leak, and a cast-iron kettle for cooking. Tommy splurged on a pair of clean socks. Ned didn't stop grinning for hours. They weren't the only ones who noticed the find. A man named Harvey Skegg, thick-necked and mean-eyed, sidled up to them that evening. He wore a pistol low on his hip and a sneer that seemed permanent. "Heard you boys struck lucky," he said, flipping a toothpick from one side of his mouth to the other. "Want set suppose you sit, to be willing to share the spot." "We worked for it," Ned replied evenly. "Fair and square." Skeggant's smile turned sharp. "Sure, but some ground gets shared whether folks want to or not." Tommy stepped between them. "You trying to scare us off?" "I thought I'm just saying, Sep," Skegg said slowly. "Things happen out here. People go missing. Claims get confused. Be a shame if you didn't dest have friends watching your backs." He sauntered off without another word. Ned exhaled. "You think he sits bluffing?" Tommy asked. "I think we need to keep watch in turns from now on." As the sun set over Dry Creek Gulch, painting the hills in hues of copper and blood orange, Ned sat by the fire and stared at the nugget's twin, his newest find from that afternoon. It was small, but real, tangible, proof that his journey hadn't been in vain. But for all the shine in his hands, his mind was restless. The camp was changing, growing tense. Grade hung in the air like smoke, and now they had a rival, someone watching. Still, as he looked at Tommy asleep beside the fire, the stars rising above the black silhouettes of distant hills, Ned allowed himself a single hopeful thought. "We're here. We made it. and we've only just begun. Chapter 7. Trouble in the Canyon. The gold was real. The land was rich, but so were the dangers. A week after their lucky nugget find, Ned Sinton and Tommy Rigg stood knee-deep in a narrow stream that curled like a silver ribbon through a canyon west of Dry Creek Gulch. This was a new spot, one that old Joe Tackett had tipped them off to before heading upriver with another crew. "Quieter out here," Joe had said. "Less gold maybe, but fewer eyes too. Sometimes peace is worth more than glitter." Ned agreed. After their run-in with Harvey Skegg, quiet sounded good, but peace, they'd soon learn, was in short supply in California. They worked the canyon stream for 3 long days, panning gravel and scraping silt from between boulders. The labor was brutal, but they found color, tiny flakes, and a few dustings heavy enough to collect. Hope stirred in their chests again. They marked the spot according to camp custom, a ring of stones and a crude wooden sign with their initials burned into it. No law said it was theirs, but in the goldfields a claim meant as much as a man's word, sometimes more. On the 4th morning they arrived to find their sign broken in half and 2 strangers digging where they'd left off. Ned froze. Tommy dropped his pan. "Hey," Ned called out, "that sips our claim." One of the men, broad-shouldered, with a scruffy beard and a revolver on his hip, didn't sit, even look up. "Don't she your name on the deed, friend?" "There aren't set deeds," Tommy snapped, walking forward, "but that ground sips." The second man, lean and wiry with a mouthful of chewing tobacco, spat into the stream. "Not anymore, it ain't set." A cold knot formed in Ned's stomach. He recognized them. Skegg's men, not just random squatters. This was a message. "We cert not looking for a fight," Ned said carefully, "but we staked this spot." The bearded man finally looked up, eyes cold, "and now we sit are unstaking it. You want it back, get a posse, or get gone." Tommy started forward, fists clenched, but Ned had caught his arm. "Don set," he muttered. "Not here, not here, not now." They left, fuming, their tools still in the sand by the stream. Back in camp, Ned paced their lean-to while Tommy stewed silently, sharpening a stick with his knife. "We can sit, let them steal it," Tommy said. "I know," Ned said, "but if we fight them alone, we sit lose more than our claim." He made a decision. That evening, they went to find old Joe. Joe was camped upriver, with a pair of veteran miners and a cast-iron coffee pot that looked older than gold itself. He listened quietly as Ned told the story. When Ned finished, Joe nodded slowly. "Seen this before. Bullies staking claims with fists instead of pans." "So what do we do?" Tommy asked. "You get witnesses," Joe said. "You go back with friends, decent men, people who sell stand with you. Not to fight, at least not first, just to show you set, not alone." Joe stood, poured 3 mugs of tar-black coffee, and added, "Out here the only law is the law of numbers." The next morning, Ned and Tommy returned to the canyon with Joe, his companions, and 3 other miners who'd worked beside them before. 7 men in total, all armed, though most didn't have to show it. The 2 squatters were still there, Skegg Sem's men. When they saw the group coming, they stood slowly. The one with the revolver narrowed his eyes. "Didn't Sick think you had the guts?" "Didn't think you had the gall," Joe replied calmly. Ned stepped forward. "We staked this claim fair. There are 7 witnesses here who saw us mark it. If you think you can take it with threats, think again." A long silence. Then the bearded man spat. "Wasn't worth it anyway." He kicked over a pan of silt and walked off, the wiry man close behind. They didn't look back. The group helped Ned and Tommy remark the claim, repaired the broken sign, and stayed to help dig for a few hours. But something had changed. Even as the canyon echoed again with the sound of shovels and water, Ned felt the pressure in his chest ease only a little. This was no longer a dream without danger. This was a fight for every inch, every flake, every speck of gold. As Joe packed his gear, he said quietly, "You boys did right, but be careful. Men like that don't forget." Later, as the sun dipped behind the canyon walls and the stream shimmered in the fading light, Ned stood with Tommy, staring at the darkening trail where the intruders had vanished. "We won today," Tommy said, "but I don't sing the last of them." "No," Ned agreed. "This place tests everyone, but I sit past that test, even if I have to fight for it." and as stars began to prick the sky, the canyon once more fell silent, watching, waiting for what would come next. Chapter 8. A Stranger Sips. Warning. The days after reclaiming their canyon claim passed quietly, but uneasily. Ned Sinton and Tommy Rigg continued working the stream, finding modest flakes and the occasional nugget. They took turns on watch at night. No one spoke of Harvey Skegg, but both boys felt his shadow stretching long across their days. The camp was changing too. More wagons arrived every week, crammed with men from every corner of the country and the world. Tents multiplied, saloons added new walls, prices climbed, fights broke out more often over smaller things. The golden dream still burned in the hearts of many, but it was being choked by greed, exhaustion, and something darker, fear. That sits when the stranger appeared. It was a foggy evening when Ned first noticed him, a tall, lean figure in a faded grey duster coat, leaning against a post outside the general store. A broad-brimmed hat shaded his eyes, and a stub of a cigar smoked in the corner of his mouth. He wasn't doing anything, just watching. The next morning he was at the riverbank, arms folded, standing beside the blacksmith's tent. Later that day he appeared at the saloon doorway but didn't go inside. He was like smoke, there then gone. "Who is that fellow?" Tommy asked. "Dunno that no said, but he sets not digging, and he sets not buying." "Then what fanit's he doing?" "Watching, like he sits waiting for something." That night, they found out what. Ned was returning from the cook tent when he saw the man again, this time closer by the firelight near their lean-to. "You're Ned Sinton," the stranger said without preamble. Ned stiffened. "Yes. And your friend Set's Tommy Rigg." Ned Sitt's hand went to the knife at his belt, just in case. "What do you want?" The man took a drag from his cigar, then dropped it and crushed it underfoot. "Just to talk." He stepped closer, revealing a face weathered by years of sun and silence. A pale scar cut across his cheek. His eyes were a cold, piercing blue, not unkind, but sharp, like someone who'd seen too much to bother with pleasantries. "Namesep's Mason Cole," he said. "I've been riding this gold trail for 5 years now. Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, now here." Ned watched him carefully. "You following us?" "No, but I saw what happened out at the canyon, and I know the man behind it, Harvey Skegg." Ned Sitt's pulse quickened. "What about him?" Cole looked around, then lowered his voice. "Skegg sits not just a bully, he sits a claim jumper, a thief, and worse. He and his men have done this before, twice in Nevada, drove one fella off a cliff, buried another alive, never proven. No law out here, see." Ned felt the cold night air bite deeper. "Why are you telling me this?" Goshul's gaze sharpened. "Because you two are green, but you Civ got spine, and he doesn't sit like that. You embarrassed his men, he one sit let that go, so you Cibbed best be ready. He Cib come again, and next time, he one sit send flunkies." Tommy had returned by now, and listened silently. "You trying to scare us off?" he asked. "No," Cole said, "trying to keep you alive." He started to walk away, then paused. "If I were you, I stop sleeping under canvas. Build a wall, a roof, something you can defend, and never, ever mine alone." Then he was gone into the shadows, like a ghost who spoke in warnings and vanished with the night. The next morning, Ned and Tommy sat at the fire, barely touching their food. "You believe him?" Tommy asked. "Yes," Ned said, "every word." They spent the day hauling scrap timber from a burned-out shack up the hill. By sundown, they'd built a crude wooden shelter around their camp, a frame, a roof, and 3 low walls. It wasn't much, but it was stronger than canvas. It had a door that latched. They also began carrying their gold dust in a pouch hidden under the floorboards. Not even old Joe knew where they stored it now. From then on, they never mined alone. One dug while the other watched. They trained with their rifle daily, aiming at knots in logs, setting up tin cans along the trail. Neither of them liked the thought of using it, but they liked the thought of dying even less. At night, the stars still gleamed, and the fire still crackled. The river still murmured with gold, but something had changed. The dream was still alive, but it was surrounded now by shadows. Skegg hadn't made a move yet, but the warning was clear. This place didn't just demand work. It demanded readiness. and trust only in those who'd already bled beside you. Ned stared into the fire one night, listening to the wolves howl in the hills. "We such are not boys anymore," he said aloud. Tommy looked up. "No, we sturt gold miners now." Ned shook his head. "No, we sit survivors." Chapter 9. The Bandit Sets Bluff. The next 2 weeks passed without a sign of Harvey Skegg or his men. No broken tools, no thefts, no threats, nothing. But to Ned Sinton and Tommy Rigg, the silence wasn't comfort, it was pressure, winding tighter each day. The calm before a storm. They worked, watched, and waited, always glancing over their shoulders. Then the storm arrived. And it didn't come with shouting or gunfire. It came quietly, along a narrow trail at dawn, with the sound of hooves and the crack of a branch. An ambush in the pines. It was a crisp morning in early October when Ned and Tommy took their gold pouch, nearly 2 full ounces of dust and flakes, down to the settlement's assayer for weighing and recording. They decided to walk, carrying the pouch in a waxed leather belt pouch sewn inside Ned's coat. They kept their rifles slung, thinking they'd be safer traveling light. They never made it. The trail through the pine woods that edged the canyon was narrow, only wide enough for 2 men shoulder to shoulder. About halfway to camp, they passed a cluster of sharp boulders, a natural choke point known to travelers as Dead Man's Hollow. That sips when the voice came. "Easy now, boys. Hands in the air. Slowly." 2 men stepped from behind the rocks. One held a cocked pistol, the other had a rifle aimed squarely at Ned's chest. Both wore faded coats, scarves around their necks, and grim smiles like wolves who'd cornered their prey. "Drop the guns," the pistol man said. "No hero stuff." Ned and Tommy hesitated, but they weren't fools. Slowly, they laid their rifles on the ground. "That set's better," said the rifleman, stepping forward. "Now, where sets the gold?" Tommy Sepp's mouth curled. "We Sepp just out for a stroll." "Sure you are," the pistol man grinned. "And I stum the governor of California." He stepped forward and patted Ned's coat. The gold pouch was impossible to hide. It crinkled under his touch. "Well, well, what sips we got here." He yanked it free and held it up. The pouch gleamed with dust, clinging to the waxed inside. Tommy swore under his breath. "Nice haul," the rifleman said. "Boss'll be pleased." That confirmed it. Skegg had sent them. Ned's fists clenched, but he kept still. The rifle aimed at his chest didn't waver. "You planning to leave us alive?" Ned asked carefully. The pistol man laughed. "Now why would we waste bullets on 2 little squirrels like you?" He tossed the pouch into a saddlebag and turned, but just before disappearing into the trees, he said, "Keep digging, boys. We fell be back to collect." The moment they were gone, Tommy snatched up his rifle. "We can catch them." Ned had grabbed his arm. "We don't know how many more there are. They stole everything, Ned. That was weeks of work." "I know," Ned said, "but we set no good to anyone dead." Still, as they hurried back to camp to report the robbery, fire burned behind his ribs. Not just anger, humiliation. They had been careful, quiet, always alert, but it wasn't enough. Skegg hadn't needed to come himself. He'd sent men, confident enough to leave them alive, confident enough to come back. That night, Ned called a meeting. Around the fire, he gathered Old Joe, Mason Cole, and 3 other miners they trusted, men with calloused hands and steady eyes. The group listened quietly as Ned described the ambush. "Skegg's Deck's gang is growing bolder," Mason said at last. "This wasn't set about gold. It was a warning. They set telling everyone here. Set, we own this canyon. Set." Joe nodded. "They still do it again. To you, to others. Maybe worse next time." "Then what do we do?" Tommy asked. "Go to the sheriff. Wait, right? There isn't sect one." "There could be," Mason said slowly. "If enough of us band together, we can set our own rules, like the miners' 6 courts in the north. Elected judge, voted sheriff, trials by peers. But we need numbers and unity." "Can we get it?" Ned asked. Joe looked into the fire. "We still have to." The next morning, Ned and Tommy stood in the center of Dry Creek Gulch as a crowd gathered. Word of the robbery had spread like wildfire. Ned stepped up onto a crate and raised his voice. "My name is Ned Sinton. Some of you know me, some of you don't sit. But this morning, we were robbed on the North Trail. Not tricked, not cheated, robbed, at gunpoint. By men who think they own this camp. Murmurs, nods, angry frowns. If we let them get away with it, more will follow. You lose your gold, your gear, your safety. But if we stand together, we can stop this. We can build something better. A silence fell. Then old Joe stepped beside him. I still stand with him. Then Mason. Then two more. Soon, a dozen hands went up. That afternoon, a notice was hammered into the center post of Dry Creek Gulch. Miners set council to be formed. All honest men invited to vote. One claim, one voice. No law but the rule of the camp. Enforced by those who live and dig here. And at the bottom, in rough scratched letters, we will not be bullied. As night fell, and the camp lit up with quiet fires and the cautious hope of a new idea, Ned sat beside the creek, staring into the black water. Tommy joined him, holding a battered tin cup of coffee. We lost the dust, Tommy said, but I think we gained something bigger. Ned didn't answer right away. He was thinking of Skeg, somewhere out there, grinning in the dark. No more hiding, Ned said finally. Next time he comes, we shall be ready. He wasn't just chasing gold anymore. He was defending a future. Chapter 10. Gold Fever. The new Miners' Council changed everything. For the first time since arriving in Dry Creek Gulch, Ned Sinton and Tommy Rigg felt part of something larger than just a gold chase. Men who had once eyed each other with suspicion, now shared tools, tips, and stories by the fire. The camp was still rough, still wild, but it had a shape, a rhythm, a sense of law. But it didn't take long for the old danger to take a new form, one that didn't come from knives or guns. It came from inside, from a sickness that no rifle could cure. Gold fever. After the robbery, Ned and Tommy had redoubled their efforts. Their losses had hurt, but not broken them. They worked sunrise to sundown, digging into a fresh creek bend where thick, slow-moving water pooled behind a fallen tree. And one afternoon, it happened again. A vein. Tommy was scraping under a rock ledge when his pan flashed not just with flakes, but ribbons, thin, winding strands of pure gold curled through the black sand like frozen sunlight. He didn't yell this time. He just stared, mouth open. Ned saw it too. Is it? Oh, it's 6 gold, Tommy whispered. It's 6 real gold. They pulled nearly 1.5 ounces in a single day. Enough for real boots, real food, a horse if they wanted. They celebrated with stew and fresh bread bought from a traveling cook wagon. That night, as the fire danced, they whispered their plans: better tents, stronger tools, a winter storehouse, maybe even buying into one of the timber claims to build a real cabin. They were beginning to believe this might actually work. That was when something changed in Tommy. Ned had noticed it first in the mornings. Tommy would be up earlier, digging even before breakfast. Then it was the way he started skipping meals entirely, hunched over the sluice like a man possessed. Ned would say, "We've got enough to take a rest." Tommy would reply, "Just one more pan." Then, "Just one more hour." Then, "Go on without me." He stopped laughing. He stopped talking. His hands blistered until they bled. He stopped helping around the shelter. He barely slept. All he thought about was the next pan, the next speck, the next hope. Ned tried to ignore it at first, thinking it was just determination, just Tommy being Tommy. But gold had gotten into his friend Sep's blood. Ned confided in old Joe, who was now acting as a de facto council elder. Joe listened silently, chewing the end of his pipe. "I'd seen it before," he said. "Fever Sep's not just for the sick. Gold eats a man's soul if he lets it." "Can I stop him?" Ned asked. Joe shook his head. "Not unless he wants to stop. He's got to choose to let go of it." That night, Ned sat by the fire, waiting for Tommy to return from the river. He came back well after dark, mud-smeared, exhausted, and silent. "Tommy," Ned said, "you got to slow down. We got enough for now. You wearing yourself down." Tommy sat without replying, staring into the flames. Finally he muttered, "If I stop now, someone else will take it. The gold sips there, Nud. I feel it. It sips waiting for me." Ned didn't sleep that night. A wake-up call. 3 days later, it came to a head. Tommy was working alone at dusk when the bank beneath him gave way. Ned heard the shout and ran. He found Tommy half submerged in mud and water, his leg twisted beneath a fallen log. "Help can sit move," he gasped. Ned didn't hesitate. He waded in, hauling at the log, slipping and falling in the freezing water. It took 15 minutes to drag Tommy clear and another hour to splint his leg and carry him back to camp. "You could sieve died," Ned said, shaking with fury. "You nearly died, and for what? A few more flakes." Tommy's face was pale and streaked with pain, but the fever was gone from his eyes. "I know," he whispered. "I lost myself, Ned. I thought if I just kept digging, I'd never have to go back to being nothing." "You were never nothing," Ned said. Tommy Seps's eyes welled. He looked away. Recovery and reflection. For the next week, Tommy stayed in the shelter, his leg bound, his hands idle. He hated it, at first. But Ned made him laugh again. Shared stew, jokes, stories from home. They began planning together again, not just how to dig, but how to build, what kind of life they might want after the gold. And for the first time in weeks, Tommy smiled and meant it. "I think I've sit and done chasing gold like it sips a ghost," he said one morning. "From now on, I sit and dig like it sips just a job, not a purpose." Ned nodded. "We still dig smart, not desperate." By the end of the month, Tommy was limping but walking. They still mined, carefully, together. They also helped build the first miners' storehouse, a shared project organized by the council to hold tools, food, and medicine. Others noticed. The fever in the camp was breaking, not completely, but enough. Men who had once hoarded now shared. A miner gave away half his stew to a sick neighbor. Another gave up a rich patch of ground to help tend a friend's injury. The dream was changing, and so were its dreamers. Ned realized something that night as he looked over the creek from the ridge. The gold was still there, but it wasn't the most valuable thing in California. What mattered most was what you built with it, who you became in the digging. Chapter 11, Turning Point. The first frost of November glittered like powdered silver across the hills above Dry Creek Gulch. Ned Sinton woke early, his breath a white cloud in the cold air. The camp was quieter now. Winter crept closer, and many miners had either left for better prospects or returned east, beaten by hunger, sickness, or disappointment. But Ned and Tommy Rigg were still there, wiser, leaner, and no longer driven by fever. The canyon had tested them. They had come through changed. But the true turning point was still ahead, and it wouldn't come from a pickaxe or gold pan. It would come from a choice. A fork in the trail. Tommy's leg was healing steadily, though he still walked with a slight limp. He had taken to carpentry, building crates, fixing wagons, helping the council construct a new meeting tent near the heart of the camp. Ned, meanwhile, had begun mapping the nearby streams with Old Joe. They were looking for long-term mining opportunities, places where placer gold could be extracted without stripping the land bare. "We stir not just digging anymore," Ned told Tommy one afternoon. "We stir stewarding it." Tommy grinned. "Look at you, from orphan to conservationist." But the joking faded when Mason Cole returned to camp, bloodied, bruised, and with a story that chilled their bones. Mason arrived near sundown, dragging himself into camp with his shirt torn and dried blood on his sleeve. Nerd helped him to the fire and fetched water while Tommy found the camp's only medic, a woman named Hannah with hands like a stonemason's and the heart of a healer. "What happened?" Ned asked, once Mason had been cleaned and patched. "Road south," Mason said hoarsely. "Heard Skegg was building something outside the gulch. Found him 2 days ago in the hills. He's recruiting, hiring guns, not claim jumpers, mercenaries, real ones." Tommy stiffened. "Why? What for?" "Control," Mason said. "The council, the gold, the whole valley." A long silence fell. "Bassett's planning something," Ned, Mason, finished. "And it won't set be a bluff this time." That night, the Miners' Council convened a full meeting. Every remaining digger, trader, scout, and cook gathered around a blazing bonfire in the center of the gulch. Sparks danced like fireflies against the black sky. Ned stood up, voice steady. "We came here for gold, but we found something better. We found community, law, trust. If we let Skegg and his thugs take that from us, we lose more than dust and nuggets. We lose what we built." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Tommy stepped beside him, leaning on his walking stick. "Ways it not soldiers," he said, "but we sat not victims either. We sat fought floods, snow, stampedes, and worse, we can face this together." Then Mason, bandaged but upright, spoke. "We don't need a war, but we do need to prepare. Watch the trails, train our aim, build up the defenses. The time to wait is over." When the vote came, it was unanimous. For the next 2 weeks, the camp transformed. The loose cluster of tents and shacks became a true outpost. They fortified the supply store, dug shallow trenches on the eastern trail, constructed a lookout on the hill above the creek, posted armed watches at night. They didn't want to fight, but they refused to be caught off guard again. And they practiced, Ned and Tommy along with 10 others, trained every evening, target shooting, hand signals, defensive drills. It wasn't a militia, it was a promise: we will protect what we civ earned. One cold morning, as Ned returned from his shift at the lookout, Hannah handed him a folded paper envelope, stained, frayed, but sealed with wax. It arrived with a trader from the east. Your name was written inside. He opened it carefully. It was from Mrs. Hargrave, the housekeeper from Elmwood, the only one who had ever truly shown him kindness back in England. "Dearest Ned, I write to tell you that your name has been cleared. Your uncle Reuben passed last spring, and among his things was a journal. In it he confessed to hiding the silver himself in a foolish test of your character, a test he never admitted before he died. I wept when I read it. I only wish he had made amends while alive. Your inheritance remains with the estate's trustee, untouched. You may return at any time, son, not in disgrace, but in triumph. Yours with love and pride, Mrs. M. Hargrave." Ned stared at the letter until the words blurred. Then he folded it neatly and tucked it into his coat. That night, as the fire crackled and frost formed along the wagon rims, Ned sat beside Tommy and told him everything. Tommy listened, quiet. "So, you are free," he said. "I guess I am. You going back?" Ned thought for a long time. "I came here with nothing," he said, "and now I have something. Not just gold, roots, a purpose, people who trust me." He looked at the dark valley below, glowing with lantern light, guarded by good men. "I think I'd go back someday, but not yet." Tommy nodded. "When you do, I shall come with you." Ned smiled. Their golden dream was no longer just about treasure. It was about becoming better men, truer friends, and part of something greater than either had imagined. Chapter 12. The Forest Camp. Winter in California's interior didn't arrive with blizzards and howling winds like it did back east, but it came all the same, quiet, slow, and creeping. The rains came first, then the cold, and then the stillness. By December, much of Dry Creek Gulch had emptied. Many of the fortune hunters had packed up their pans and gone south to warmer, drier diggings. Others had headed back east, their dreams as cracked and muddy as the trails they trudged home. But Ned Sinton, Tommy Rigg, and a handful of close allies stayed behind. They weren't chasing gold anymore, they were building a life. The Miners' Council agreed it would be foolish to remain exposed in the gulch through the coldest months. The ground was turning to sludge, and the creek had begun to flood its banks. So the remaining group, just under 20 men and women, voted to relocate their winter quarters to a forested ridge a few miles above the canyon. "We shall build cabins," Old Joe had said, "hunt game, trap, pan a little if the weather sips right. But mostly we survive, together." Ned and Tommy were among the first to scout the site, a grove of pines and redwoods nestled along a fork of the North Yuba River, sheltered, elevated, and rich with wood and game. They called it Pine Hollow. It was the hardest physical work Ned had ever done. They felled trees with axes, stripped bark, and notched logs by hand. They cleared brush, dug fire pits, raised roofs, and weatherproofed the walls with pine tar and patience. Tommy, now mostly recovered, built doors and shutters with the skill of a proper carpenter. He even carved small decorations into the beams. A leaf here, a compass rose there. Little reminders that even survival could have grace. Hannah, the camp medic, organized a shared larder and taught the others to preserve meat and wild herbs. Mason Cole fashioned snowshoes from sapling branches and rawhide. Old Joe set traps every morning for rabbits and foxes, always whistling as he worked. Ned found himself loving the rhythm of it all, chopping wood by dawn, working in silence broken only by birdsong, and falling asleep by firelight with a full belly and tired hands. There was gold here too, hidden in frost-laced pools and crevices, but no one rushed it. They worked the river gently, with respect. No fever, no fights, just peaceful labor. It was the richest they ever felt. One misty morning in late December, Ned spotted something unusual while gathering firewood tracks. Not animal tracks, boot prints. Fresh. He followed them cautiously, rifle in hand, through the trees for nearly half a mile before they vanished near a stand of birch. No sign of struggle, no footprints returning. He told the others. That night, they lit extra fires and posted a watch in shifts. But the visitor never appeared. Some believed it was Skeg, scouting from afar. Others thought it might be a traveler passing through. Ned wasn't sure, but it reminded them the forest was safe, but not empty. They sharpened their knives again. The days grew shorter. The sky hovered low and grey, but Pine Hollow thrived. Ned and Tommy built a second cabin for storage and guests. They reinforced the creek bridge with pine logs. They even held a New Year's celebration, where Hannah passed around warm cider and Mason recited a poem he half remembered from his school days. That night, Tommy pulled a leather pouch from beneath his bedroll and handed it to Ned. Inside was a gold nugget, polished smooth, about the size of a walnut. Tommy shrugged. Found it near the ridge last week. Figured I sipped keep it quiet. For this. For what? Ned asked, turning the nugget over. For you, Tommy said. For when you go home someday, back to England. Ned's smile faded. I told you, I serp not ready. Tommy nodded. I know, but one day you will be, and when you walk back through those gates, I want you to carry proof that you earned your return. Ned was quiet for a long time. Then he placed the nugget back in the pouch and tucked it into his coat. I still carry it, he said. For both of us. As January wore on, the snow came, but only lightly, dusting the branches like powdered sugar. The forest grew quiet. Even the wind seemed to hush. And in that stillness, Ned began to realize something. He wasn't set just surviving anymore. He was growing into someone new, someone better. The boy who had run from disgrace in England was gone. In his place stood a young man with cool-used hands, a sharp eye, and a strong heart. And though the dream of gold had once driven him, it was no longer the treasure he chased. It was this: a home, a purpose, a life lived on his own terms. Chapter 13: Lost and Found. The forest was beautiful in winter, but beauty can be deceiving. By late January, Pine Hollow had settled into a rhythm. The snow had melted from the lower slopes, and the creek ran clear and cold again. The days were longer, the nights still bitter, but spirits were high. Cabins stood firm, food stores held. Everyone had found their role. Then came the fog. It rolled in from the mountains one morning, thick and white as wool, swallowing the trees and muffling sound. It stayed for days, coiling through the pines like a living thing. It started as a simple chore. Joe grunted his thanks and handed Ned a satchel. Watch the ice near the ridge, he warned. It sits slick as a greased eel. Ned nodded, wrapped his scarf tight, and vanished into the fog. By midday, Ned had instead returned. At first no one worried. Trails took longer in poor visibility, but by evening, with no sign of footprints and no call from the woods, unease crept in. Tommy paced the edge of camp, eyes locked on the trees. He said he'd be back by noon. Joe Sip's face was grim. We wait until morning, then we search. But Tommy didn't wait. At dawn, he and Mason Cole set out with lanterns, shouting Ned's name through the fog and following the barely there trail up the ridge. They found nothing. No tracks, no satchel, no rifle. Only a broken branch near the ravine and one boot print in the mud, facing the wrong way. When Ned had first realized he was lost, it didn't hit him all at once. He had followed the trail up toward the ridge, passing familiar trees and rocks. But in the fog, every path looked the same. He had turned back after checking 2 empty traps, then stopped, heart sinking. The landscape had shifted, or so it seemed. He walked another half mile, scanning for landmarks. Nothing. He retraced his steps. No trail. The trees closed in. By the second hour, his calm had frayed. His breath came quick. His fingers trembled, not from cold, but dread. By the third hour, he accepted it. He was well and truly lost. As the sky darkened, Ned built a crude shelter beneath a leaning pine. He stuffed his coat with dry moss, wrapped his scarf around his ears, and lit a tiny fire with the last of his matches. He had no food, no compass, just his knife, and the knowledge that panic wouldn't save him. So he sat still, and he listened. To the forest, to the wind, to his own thoughts. It was the first time in months he had been alone for more than a few hours. No Tommy, no Joe, no council meetings or gold dust or rifles. Just Ned, and the question he had been carrying deep inside since the day he left England. Who am I now? He thought of his father's voice, of Mrs. Hargrave's letter, of Elmwood's empty halls, of Dry Creek Gulch, of Pine Hollow, of the men who had followed him, the camp he'd helped build. He had lost so many things. But out here, cold, hungry, surrounded by trees, he realized what he had found. Himself. Not a runaway, not a thief, not a lucky digger, but a leader, a builder, a friend. And if he lived through the night, he'd return home, not just to camp, but to everything he'd become. At dawn, the fog broke. Sunlight streamed through the trees like golden swords, cutting the white into ribbons. And through the silence came a voice. Ned. Faint, but real. He jumped to his feet, shouting back with all the strength he had left. Moments later, Tommy appeared, mud-streaked, red-eyed and furious. "You stupid idiot," Tommy shouted, grabbing him in a tackle hug. "I thought you were dead." "Close," Ned croaked, grinning. Mason Cole followed, rifle over his shoulder, found his print by the creek, followed the ridgeline from there. They gave him water, jerky, a spare coat, and Ned laughed aloud as warmth returned to his limbs. When they walked back into camp, the cheers startled the birds. Old Joe nodded once and muttered, "Told you the boy had bones." Hannah shoved a bowl of stew into Ned's hands and told him to shut up and eat. That night, sitting by the fire, Tommy leaned over. "You scared the hell out of me." "I scared myself," Ned admitted. "But I realized something," he added after a pause. "I didn't panic because I knew even if I was lost, I had something to return to, something worth fighting for." Tommy looked around at the cabins, the people, the firelight. "Yeah," he said, "so did we." Chapter 14. The Sheriff Sepp's Fall. By late February, the air in Pine Hollow began to change. Not just the wind, which blew warmer and carried the scent of thawing earth, but something deeper, tension. The creeks swelled with meltwater. Birds returned to the trees. The forest woke from winter. So did the world beyond it. Riders came up the trail with news from the south. New gold strikes in the San Joaquin Valley, a steamboat robbery near Sacramento, a mining town gone up in flames after a drunken brawl turned into a shootout. And one more story that sent a chill through the hollow. Dry Creek Gulch had been taken over. The new order below. It started slowly, Skegg's men trickling in under the cover of early storms. Then suddenly, a surge of hired guns, fresh supplies and wagon loads of iron and timber. The town had doubled in size since the miners left for the forest, but not with builders, with enforcers. By the time the snows melted, Harvey Skegg had declared himself Sheriff of Dry Creek. No vote, no law, just guns. The old storekeeper had vanished. The council's meeting tent had been burned. A new jail, more like a holding pen, stood in the center of town. Prices soared. Claims were taxed. Anyone who spoke out vanished. He called it order. Others called it a reign. When the first refugee from the Gulch, a teenage miner named Caleb, bruised and limping, staggered into Pine Hollow one afternoon, the council gathered at once. Caleb Sipp's words were simple. He sips not just running things, he sips owning people. The room went quiet. Tommy broke the silence. "We built that town. We made it safe. If we leave it to rot, then we were never better than him." Mason nodded. "If we don't stand up now, he'll come for us next." Ned stood slowly, the last to speak. "I think we all knew this day would come. We didn't leave Dry Creek forever. We just gave it time to heal. Now it sits infected again. He looked around the table. It sits time to clean it out. The next morning, a group of 15 riders left Pine Hollow, led by Ned, Tommy, Mason, and Joe. They rode with supplies, rifles, and cold determination. No speeches, no glory, just purpose. The road back was muddy and rough. When they crested the ridge above Dry Creek Gulch, they saw the changes at once. The town was bigger, but meaner. Watchmen with rifles stood at street corners. A gallows had been erected near the creek. A red banner over the general store read, "Law and Order under Sheriff Skegg." Mason muttered, "I seen bandits with better manners." They set up a hidden camp in the pines above town, sending scouts into the gulch by night. More stories came out. Beatings, false arrests, gold confiscated from law-abiding miners, a preacher publicly whipped for criticizing Skegg's taxes. Then they found the breaking point. Caleb's brother Josiah, one of the original miners, had been jailed for hoarding. His sentence forced labor in the canyon mine. He hadn't been seen in 10 days. That was enough. The plan was simple: a midnight entry through the Old North Pass, a quick takeover of the jail, a show of unity from the real miners of Dry Creek Gulch. They struck fast and quiet. At midnight, Ned and Mason led 4 men into the town jail, overpowered the guards, and freed the prisoners, including Josiah, weak but alive. Meanwhile, Tommy and Joe slipped into the central square and lowered Skegg's banner. At dawn, the townsfolk awoke to see a crowd gathered, unarmed, standing before the council tent, rebuilt overnight. And Ned, standing in the center, calling for a vote. Skegg arrived 20 minutes later, still lacing his boots, flanked by 6 of his men. He looked older, worn, but his sneer hadn't faded. "What is this?" he growled. "A town meeting," Ned said. "You remember those?" Skegg laughed. "I stamped the law now, boy. Not today." Ned raised his voice. "Every miner here, every shopkeeper, every cook, vote now. Do you stand with Skegg, or with your council, with power, or with people?" For a moment, silence. Then one hand went up, then another, then dozens. As Skegg's 6 men backed away. Alone, Skegg reached for his pistol, but found Mason's rifle already aimed at his chest. "You lost," Mason said. Skegg's eyes burned with hate, but he didn't fight. He was escorted out. No violence, no vengeance, just justice. The red banner came down. The gallows were taken apart. The taxes lifted. The jail became a storehouse again. And at the center of town, in the place where Skegg once ruled by fear, Ned helped plant a cedar post with a hand-carved sign. Dry Creek Gulch. Miners' 6th Council restored. Honest work, free men, common law. That night, the fires burned bright, and for the first time in weeks, laughter returned to the gulch. Later, as the celebration faded and the stars blinked awake overhead, Tommy found Ned alone, staring at the sign. "You did it," Tommy said. Again. Ned shook his head. "We all did it." He looked out over the rooftops and down the starlit trail that led back to Pine Hollow. "But it sips not about what we stop, it sips about what we build." And Tommy, smiling, replied, "Then let 6 keep building." Chapter 15. A Letter from Home. The spring air in Dry Creek Gulch was soft and full of promise. The miners had retaken the town, not with bullets, but with unity. Skegg was gone. The council stood strong. Work resumed. The town breathed again. But for Ned Sinton, something deeper stirred beneath the triumph. A part of his life, the beginning of it all, was waiting to be faced. And it came not with fanfare or confrontation, but in a quiet envelope hand-delivered by a passing mail courier riding west. Ned was sorting nails in the supply cabin when Tommy appeared at the doorway, holding a crumpled paper with a red wax seal. "This just came up from Sacramento," he said, tossing it gently onto the table. "It's Seps from England." Ned stared at it for a long time. Then he picked it up, sat down, and broke the seal. The handwriting was careful, familiar. The signature at the end confirmed it. "Mrs. Hargrave, the old housekeeper from Elmwood, his uncle's estate. My dear Edward, I hope this letter finds you in health and peace. I write again with news that I trust you will now be ready to hear. As you know, your Uncle Reuben passed last year. His journals and personal letters have been read in full, and I regret to confirm that what you were accused of, that terrible accusation, was false. Your uncle himself wrote as much in his final entries. He believed he was testing your character, a cruel and misguided act which he never lived to regret aloud. The family solicitor, Mr. Barnes, has secured your rightful inheritance, now held in trust. You are, by every measure, a free and rightful man. Your name is restored. Your home awaits you. I pray you consider returning soon. With deepest affection, Miss Hargrave. Ned didn't say anything at first. He simply folded the letter, laid it on the table, and rested his hands on top of it. That night, Ned sat on the porch of their rebuilt cabin at the edge of the gulch. The fire crackled gently beside him. The stars blinked high above. Tommy came out and handed him a mug of warm cider. "So," he asked, as she said, "I've been cleared. My name, it's Seb's mine again." Tommy nodded. "That Seb's good. She wants me to come back." Tommy sat beside him. "And will you?" "I don't know." He sipped the cider. "When I first came here, all I wanted was to escape. Now, this place, these people, this life, it means something. I helped build it. I found something real here." "A home," Tommy said. "Yes." They sat in silence, listening to the creak in the distance. Then Ned added, "But maybe I don't have to choose just one." The next morning, Ned met with the council. He didn't bet to resign, but he did speak his truth. "I may need to return to England," he said. "Not to run, but to finish the story, to walk through that front door, not as a cast-off, but as the man I become, not for revenge, not even for justice, just to say I made it." Old Joe nodded slowly. "You're not the same boy who left. Go show them who you are." Tommy clapped a hand on his shoulder. "And when you do take some gold dust with you, show him what dirt and sweat can earn." Packing the past. Ned didn't leave immediately. He spent the next weeks putting things in order, helping to lay new trail signs for incoming miners, writing down the Gulch's charter with Mason and the preacher, and building one final cabin, a library, the town's first, stocked with books, scavenged from abandoned wagons. He and Tommy carved their names into the first beam. Ines and TR. Builders, not just diggers. On his last night, the whole town gathered to see him off. There were no speeches, just laughter, handshakes, and quiet farewells by firelight. Tommy handed him a wooden box. Inside were a pouch of gold dust from the canyon they claimed together, a folded drawing of the Gulch, hand-sketched by Ellie, the preacher Sip's daughter, and a simple carved medallion with one word etched in block letters: "Free, riding east." At dawn, Ned mounted the bay horse the camp had given him. As he rode up the trail, he looked back once. The Dry Creek Gulch gleamed below in the soft golden light. Smoke rose from chimneys. Laughter echoed faintly up the ridge, and he smiled. He would return. He knew it. But now, it was time to face the land that had once rejected him, not in shame, but in strength. Not as a boy accused, but as a man redeemed. Chapter 16, Fortune Beyond Gold. England, Spring, 1851. It had been almost 2 years since Ned Sinton last saw the grey sky over Elmwood House, the towering manor that once held his future in its clenched fist. Now he stood before it again, not as a shamed boy cast out into the rain, but as a man hardened by wilderness, sun, struggle, and gold. The iron gates creaked open. A servant in a neatly pressed uniform stepped aside, eyes wide but silent. Word had spread ahead of him. He walked up the gravel path slowly, each step echoing not with hesitation but with certainty. Mrs. Hargrave greeted him at the door, hands trembling, eyes glistening. "Yusip's come home," she whispered. "I never thought I would," he said gently. She took his hands and pressed them tightly, and now the house feels whole again. Inside, the halls were unchanged, high-ceilinged, polished, too silent, but they no longer crushed him. He walked them without shame. Later that day, Mr. Barnes, the estate's solicitor, met with him in the drawing room. "Your uncle left the estate and its finances to the family trust," he explained. "But you are now the sole living heir, as designated by the revised will and his final letters. The house, the land, and the inheritance. All are yours to accept or decline." Ned listened quietly. "I didn't, sir, come back for the money," he said. "I came to finish something, to close a circle." Barnes smiled faintly. "Even so, it is yours." That evening, in the study where his uncle once scolded him, Ned placed a small canvas pouch on the desk. He opened it slowly and let the gold dust spill into the light. Flecks, flecks, a single tiny nugget, all from Dry Creek Gulch. "I didn't to earn this here," he said aloud, as if the room still listened. "I earned it digging in a river with frozen fingers and bloodied hands beside people who would die for each other." He wrote 3 letters that night. One to Mrs. Hargrave, thanking her for her loyalty and offering her full stewardship of the estate's affairs. One to Tommy, promising he would return before year's end, and describing every detail of the green hills and the blooming gardens that now reminded him of the pines in California. And one to himself, folded and left in the back of a journal, beginning simply, "Let this remind you, gold is not a goal. It is only a road." He stayed in England for 2 months, long enough to clear his name in the town registry, to meet with former friends and let them see what he had become, to walk the market square with his head held high. He repaired old connections, donated to a struggling school, and arranged for 1/3 of the estate's profits to be sent annually to a new council fund, meant for prospectors, immigrants, and families rebuilding their lives in Dry Creek Gulch and beyond. But he couldn't stay. The land was green, the people polite, but it wasn't their home. Not anymore. Across the sea once more. When the ship pulled out of Liverpool Harbour, Ned stood at the rail, wind in his hair, fingers wrapped around the carved wooden medallion Tommy had given him. Free. He was wealthier now. Yes, his name cleared, his fortune real. But the only thing that truly mattered was what he carried in his soul. He wasn't sailing away from something. He was sailing toward it. When Ned returned to California, the transformation was stunning. Dry Creek Gulch had grown, not into a city, but into a true town. New cabins lined the riverbank. A schoolhouse was nearly finished. A doctor had set up shop in a proper building. 2 stores stood across from each other, in a sort of unspoken competition. Tommy met him at the trailhead, beaming and sunburned. "You look civilized," he said, smirking. Ned stepped off the horse and grinned. "I missed the dirt." Later that week, the town held its first official election, ratifying the Miners' Council as the governing body. Mason Cole was named Marshal, Old Joe, council chairman. Hannah opened a clinic with funds Ned had brought. And Ned, he declined any position. He had enough of titles. Instead, he helped build a new community hall, big enough to hold meetings, dances, sermons, and soon a wedding, though whose no one would yet admit. He placed one small item in the foundation, a copper coin engraved on both sides with a word he'd come to live by: honor. At the top of the ridge, just beyond the canyon where he and Tommy first dug, stood a marker carved in redwood. Here begins the golden dream, not of wealth, but of worth. Let every man and woman who walks this trail remember, fortune lies not in the earth, but in the hands that shape it. Nels, Chapter 17, Homecoming. It wasn't just a return, it was a beginning. By the time Ned Sinton rode back into Dry Creek Gulch, the town had shed the final shreds of its past. The old days of pickaxe duels, dusty tents, and stolen gold were now stories told over campfires to new arrivals who didn't quite believe them. And now, Ned wasn't just returning. He was arriving for the first time as a man who belonged. Dry Creek had changed. The wood-plank sidewalks were new. The buildings now stood straight and freshly painted. A schoolhouse bell rang each morning. A small chapel with a single stained glass window glowed at sunset. Children played in the dirt streets where gunfights once flared. The air still held the scent of pine smoke and baked dust, but it also carried something else: peace. And Ned could see it in the faces of the people. Miners who once dug side by side now ran workshops. Women who cooked over campfires now ran bakeries, apothecaries, and boarding houses. Refugees from failed camps nearby had found homes here and hope. The dream had grown up. So had its dreamers. Tommy was waiting for him at the stable, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. No wave, no cheers. Just took you long enough. Ned dismounted with a laugh. You haven't changed. I got taller. No, you didn't sit. They embraced briefly, like men who didn't need to speak to know everything that had passed between them. Then Tommy said, "Your cabin sits still standing. We swept out the spiders." Ned grinned, even the big one behind the stove. "No, she sits got squatters' sits rights now." That week, Ned walked the entire town, met old friends, new faces, council members, and merchants. He gave away 2/3 of his gold to fund the expansion of the school and clinic. The rest he used to purchase lumber and tools. He didn't just want a monument, he wanted roots. And so quietly, without ceremony, he and Tommy started building again, not just cabins but a future. They sketched new irrigation plans, helped repair bridges, organized a shipment of books from San Francisco. They offered jobs to wanderers and newcomers alike. And the town, no, the community, flourished. One night, back in his modest log cabin, Ned placed a small frame above the hearth. Inside it was a folded copy of the letter from Mrs. Hargrave, now yellowing with age. Not to remind him of pain, but of the road, of how far he had come, and of what he had found, not just redemption, but meaning. In early summer, the town held a celebration, the 3rd anniversary of Dry Creek Gulch's founding. There were music, dancing, pie contests, and a foot race Tommy insisted on entering and lost by a humiliating margin to a teenage girl named Elsie. At sundown, everyone gathered by the creek. Mason lit a lantern, held it high, and said, "We built this with hands, yes, but also with faith. We made a place where a man or woman can come with nothing and walk away with everything that matters." Then, without asking permission, he turned to Ned. "And none of us would be here without this man." The crowd erupted in cheers. Ned shook his head, smiling. "That sits not true." But it was, and he knew it. After the crowd had drifted home, Ned walked the ridge trail alone. The stars shimmered above like gold dust in the sky. He found the marker they had carved a year before, his words, still bold. "Fortune lies not in the earth, but in the hands that shape it." He touched the wood, closed his eyes, and smiled. He was no longer a boy running from shame, no longer a man chasing gold, no longer a name to clear. He was Ned Sinton. Home. At last. Chapter 18. The Real Treasure. Years passed. Not all at once, but in small, honest increments. A nail hammered, a field cleared, a name carved into a doorframe. And in the town of Dry Creek Gulch, the once lawless gold camp had become a place unlike any other, a beacon in the wilderness, built by those who had come not just for gold, but for something greater. At the heart of it was a man who had never planned to stay, and yet he had stayed, not for the dust beneath the river stones, but for the people beside them. Ned Sinton. By his 30th year, Ned no longer dug gold from the earth. Others did, of course, but he had hung up his pan long ago. Instead, he taught. He taught new arrivals how to find honest work, how to read and write, how to plant crops and not just dig holes. He helped train apprentices, settle disputes, and keep the council honest. He wasn't elected to anything, but when trouble came, people came to him. When the school needed books, Ned found them. When the river flooded, he led the sandbag line. When a baby was born, he was often the first to hold her. He had become what his father once was, a quiet leader. One rainy spring afternoon, Ned stood in his cabin, looking through a small wooden box he kept beneath his bed. Inside were only a few items. A gold nugget from his first claim with Tommy, the letter that had cleared his name, a worn sketch of Dry Creek Gulch, yellowed with time, a tiny bundle of dried pine needles from Pine Hollow, and a small carved medallion that simply read, "Free." He looked at it and smiled. This, he whispered, was the treasure all along. Tommy, ever the schemer, had eventually started a sawmill outside town and somehow became the most reluctant businessman in the region. "I just wanted a quiet life," he complained, to anyone who would listen, while signing lumber contracts and organizing shipments. He married the school teacher, Elsie, the same girl who once outran him, and together they raised 2 loud, bright, chaotic sons who refused to wear shoes even in winter. Tommy never left Dry Creek. He never needed to. By the 10th year since its founding, Dry Creek Gulch had a school with 3 teachers, a small but thriving trading post, a medical clinic, a shared grain store, a library filled with books sent by Ned's family in England, and the only known brass band in the Sierra foothills, which was terrible but loud. Visitors often asked, what made this place work when so many others failed? And the townsfolk always said the same thing. Because we remembered the difference between gold and value. One quiet evening, Ned and Tommy sat on a hill outside town where they used to hunt rabbits and build dreams from dust. The sky was soft with twilight. The wind smelled of wood smoke and river. We did it, Tommy said, leaning back on his elbows. We turned a mud hole into a town. Ned smiled, and you turned into a businessman. Watch your mouth. They laughed quietly. Then Tommy asked, do you ever wish we struck it big, like really big? Ned thought for a moment. No, he said. If we had, we might sit left. Tommy nodded. Funny, isn't sit it? Ned added, we came here chasing something shiny in the ground, but the best things, the ones that stayed, weren't sit buried, they were all around us. In people, in purpose, in what we chose to build. Tommy raised a flask. To the dream, he said. Ned tapped his cup to it. To the real treasure. But character is what shines. Thanks for spending this quiet time with me here at Sweet Dreams Storytelling. I hope you're feeling relaxed, peaceful, and ready for a restful sleep. As we say goodnight, let the calm background music guide you gently into dreamland. Before you go, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. And until next time, rest well.